with everything going on in the Uber and Lyft war, if I'd call it that, especially happening in Minneapolis, something has popped up that I really did not expect, being honest. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that the more I think about this could actually be game-changing for the entire future of ride-sharing. So this is an article kind of talking about the situation going on in Minneapolis right now, an updated article, might as well say that. Also, I'm currently in Denver, Colorado, hence the kind of unique or different setup. I'm in an Airbnb right now, which actually, I feel like this Airbnb feels more like a hotel. But anyway, hence the kind of weird chair, which I think it looks kind of cool. Almost feels like a race car chair, by the way. It's kind of a weird chair. Anyway, jumping into the article though, and this is the big thing, that these three alternative rideshare companies, Move, My Wheels, and Rides, received approval to operate in Minneapolis and expect to launch in mid-May. So in a few days, at least at the exact time of this video, this will be happening. And this is why this is so big. That what happened is, in Minneapolis, to give a brief story, there was going to be a new wage law being put forward to pay drivers what they should be getting paid. Uber and Lyft, and they do this all the time, said, hey, you know what? If you do this, we're going to leave Minneapolis. We're not going to give you airport rides anymore. And it's kind of like a cat and mouse game or like a poker game of calling someone's bluff. So the city said, you know what? Because you're saying you're going to leave on, I think it was May 1st, we're gonna wait. We're actually going to push back the new wage law until I think it's like July 1st. And at first for me, I'm like, okay, that's super annoying. They're conceding to Uber and Lyft. But now I'm actually changing my stance because it's almost like, in a unique sense, I mentioned the word war in the beginning of this video, that they're almost preparing for the unique battle of what would happen if Uber and Lyft did actually leave. It's almost like, at first, I thought the city was almost being cowards. I hate to use that word, a bit of a strong word. That they're almost being like, oh, you know what, well, maybe we'll wait a little bit and everything. But now I'm like, you know what? On the other end, this would be the best situation possible because now this gives a lot of other ride-sharing companies time to prepare to be in Minneapolis. And with that allotted amount of time, that means the marketing will be in place. Customers will hear about these apps and everything. And as a result, by the time the new date comes up, which I believe is July 1st, I'm going to check for you the article, but I believe it's July 1st, that means there'll be so much infrastructure in place with these other ride-sharing companies. This could be huge, right? So you can see right here that they're planning on launching mid-May, like I just said, and more than 10 rideshare companies expressed interest in entering the local market when rideshare giants Uber and Lyft said they were going to cease operations in the city as a result of the new Minneapolis ordinance increasing wages for drivers. So the fact that so many companies now are coming into place, I think before it was just kind of this vague area where I think a lot of people would say, shoot, what are we going to do without Uber and Lyft? Like, what are we going to do? Now, it's seeming to be more and more evident that the city, Minneapolis, in that given area, is going to be fine, right? I mean, it's tough to say exactly, right? And going down here, this is kind of the legislation, right? And going down here, that even as they've been talking about this, right, both Uber and Lyft are not happy about the fact that they're still pushing forward with this new wage law. Even though they're pushing it back a little bit, they're still not happy, right? As you can see here, one Lyft spokesman said, rides will be unaffordable for most across the state, which is not true. I'll talk about that in a little bit. Not just in Minneapolis, and drivers will earn even less. It would make the service unsustainable in Minnesota, and we would be forced to shut down throughout the state should it pass. And going down here, there's a few things they're talking about, right? Like I said, Move, Rides, and My Wheels. Joy also applied for a license, but hasn't been approved. So I think this is huge that, you know, you can see right here, owner of My Wheels, Elam Bayer, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, said, I'm very happy. I think one of the first ones they've approved. So the fact that you're seeing all this happening is just, it's crazy to me, right? In a really good way, you know, that originally it was going to start May 1st, Uber and Lyft threatened to pull out. Then yes, they pushed it back to July 1st. I was 99% sure it was July 1st. But you can see that what's interesting is it gives more time for alternative services to get up and running and to give state legislators more time to craft their bill. And like I said, one big thing about this, and the reason I'm so invested in this story, this may be like the 5th or 6th video I've done about this whole case in Minneapolis, and the reason why, like I've said in other videos, is it's a good indicator of what could potentially happen around the rest of the country. California and New York have already passed their own wage laws and everything, but those are California and New York. They're the two biggest states. two very different markets. It's not a good, I think, representation of an average city or an average area. And a lot of places are looking at this exact story. And like I said, at first, I thought, oh my God, the city is just bowing down to Uber and Lyft like every other city does. I cannot believe they're pushing this back. Then maybe it'll be pushed back again. Maybe it never happens. And Uber and Lyft once again just wins, right? Now, though, I'm like, it's the exact opposite. The city's now preparing and gearing up for this potential battle or situation or tricky whatever, that if Uber and Lyft leaves, the city's now has had enough time of preparation, and including these companies, I think more than anything, in terms of marketing, getting the word out there of all these other features of these other companies. This could be big because now that all these companies have time to prepare, as I go down here, you could see all these kind of nitty-gritty little things, talking about funding, talking about transportation licenses, and etc. The fact that all these companies are preparing now and have enough adequate time to prepare, by the time July 1st rolls around, if Uber and Lyft does happen to leave, they could be fine. And again, I think this is just another big sign of what could be happening a lot in the future for Uber and Lyft. I think, which is kind of interesting, now that I'm looking at all this, not just Minneapolis, but also Massachusetts. I'm going to do maybe a follow-up video in a couple of days because there's a lot happening in Massachusetts right now with the state after being audited and Uber and Lyft being aggressively targeted and looking at all the numbers and the finances and the analytics. Uber and Lyft is now being sued by the state saying, look, you owe your drivers and you owe us hundreds of millions of dollars for treating your drivers as independent contractors, and you did not treat them well. They should be getting back pay, unemployment, and all this kind of stuff, right? So this is not just happening here. And it's interesting that I think it's kind of one of those like power and number situations where the quasi-monopoly that Uber and Lyft has over the ride-sharing market is now being pretty rigorously attacked. And the fact that you look at what's going on in Minneapolis, the fact that they're going after Uber and Lyft and charging more, and now having other ride-sharing companies come into play, if, like I said, July 1st rolls around, Uber and Lyft leaves, all these companies come in and they've had enough adequate time to prepare, which is what's going on right now, they could be fine. And that'll be a huge kind of case study to show other cities like, hey, you don't have to bow down to Uber and Lyft because you kind of have no other choice, right? Like a few years ago, even like 3 or 4 years ago, I mean, granted the pandemic was a little bit different, but you kind of had to use Uber and Lyft. Yes, there are very specific, like location-specific ride-sharing companies, like Empower is one of them I've already done a video about, and other ones. But I think in this situation, it's interesting that they're showing you, with all these companies coming into play, we might not need Uber and Lyft anymore. And the benefit of that is it gives way more power, and I think I might even use the word respect to drivers, because for years, as every driver knows, there's a lot of benefits to Uber and Lyft. There's a lot of amazing things Uber and Lyft has done. There's no question about that. And it's genuinely changed a lot of people's lives. In Minneapolis, I talked about this, and I think in the first or second video I did, it was average, tough to say exactly, but roughly about 10,000 drivers' jobs would be compromised and gone if Uber and Lyft left. Not even just people ordering Ubers and Lyfts, but all the drivers as well, right? And if you think about it, whether you love Uber and Lyft or hate it, there's no denying it, that's 10,000 new jobs Uber and Lyft created in just Minneapolis alone that allows people to drive on their own dime, become independent contractors in terms of doing things when they want, how they want, etc. And again, there's pros and cons to both things, and I like to look at both sides, right? There's a lot of benefits to Uber and Lyft, but also there's a lot of cons. And I've talked about these cons in numerous videos, and I think the biggest con right now, if you look at all these other videos that have been posted on YouTube by all these other amazing, I think they're called like ride tubers, is like the slang term, like basically rideshare YouTubers, comes down to this. Drivers are not being paid what they should be getting paid. Uber and Lyft is taking out a bigger cut than ever before, especially with things like inflation increasing and just general day-to-day living becoming more expensive. It's ironic that the pay for the average rideshare driver is lowering as inflation is increasing. It doesn't make any sense. Every other job is paying people more. In-N-Out, when I first moved to California, I can't remember what it was, but it was like, I think $18 an hour In-N-Out was paying, which is pretty ridiculous. In-N-Out's an amazing place to work, I want to say. Now it's like between, I think, $20 and $23 an hour to work at In-N-Out. So companies are adjusting for inflation, except Uber and Lyft. They're really always the exception to the rule. And I think one thing Uber and Lyft does horribly, and there's no denying this, is they don't treat their drivers the way they should be being treated. They do not treat their drivers well. And I mentioned this in a video, the 5 main reasons why I would never be an Uber driver or a Lyft driver ever again. And the biggest thing I talked about in the beginning was the status confusion. It's kind of like a lose-lose. Either A, you don't know if you're an independent contractor or an employee. It's this gray area. You really don't know where you're classified as, which gives Uber and Lyft the power to treat their drivers worse. Look what's going on in Massachusetts, like I said, or in Minneapolis, where a lot of cities will say, wow, they don't really classify the drivers specifically. They kind of classify them as independent contractors, but also they're kind of being treated like employees. It doesn't really make sense. And I think as a result of this confusion, Uber and Lyft has gotten away with treating their drivers poorly. In addition, on this lose-lose side, even if they do get pigeonholed as independent contractors, like what happened in California after Prop 22, they almost get even a greater, I don't know what the word is, like ability, if that's the right word, or power to try to treat their drivers even worse by saying, hey, you guys voted to make them independent contractors. Now we can treat them worse because they 100% are independent contractors. And again, this whole thing is a mess. But what's kind of good about this is I feel like that since I first started driving and got into Uber and Lyft, I feel like the ride-sharing world's gotten worse and worse. I genuinely feel, I hate to say it, I hate to be pessimistic. There are some positives that have increased. But I feel like right now we're almost in like the dark era of ride-sharing. And I feel like that this is one of the first times I feel like things are on the upswing. Now a lot of states, a lot of cities, a lot of legislation, auditors and accountants are now looking at Uber and Lyft being, hey, and realizing like, hey, they're really not paying their drivers well, huh? Like they're really somehow skating away with treating their drivers like independent contractors when they're kind of really employees. How is Uber and Lyft continuing to get away with this? And I feel like now we're kind of on this upswing where now with more people realizing what Uber and Lyft has been doing with the misclassification of drivers, not paying them well, things like wrongful deactivations and a lot more, things are on the upswing for drivers. And I think that this is hopefully, again, like I said, the reason why I'm so excited that this could be like a massive influential change for the future is that it's showing other cities what to do. That if, like, say this is going well, and so far it is, with all these new ride-sharing companies coming in and now taking over and being approved and getting the marketing out there and getting clientele in terms of drivers and riders, it could very well be that in, month and a half-ish from now, at least at the time of this video, by July 1st rolls around, if Uber and Lyft does decide to leave, which you never know, they might say, you know what, okay, fine, we'll stay. You never know. But if Uber and Lyft does decide to leave, well, they're going to be okay. And even on top of this, right, I've mentioned this in other videos. I briefly touched upon it earlier. They've done a study. It was over like 1 billion rides that were reviewed. And it was demonstrated. One of the main kind of meta points or taking away points was any single time Uber and Lyft says, oh, you know what, we just can't afford it in this area, we're going to have to leave. It's going to cost more money for rides. Drivers are going to get paid less, et cetera, et cetera. That's not the case. With over 1 billion rides being reviewed, it was found actually, if new wage laws did get put forward, Uber and Lyft would be okay, right? So it could very well be that if, let's say, July 1st does roll around and Uber and Lyft leaves, with all this preparation happening right now, literally as I'm making this video and as you're watching it, with all this preparation happening, it could be that there's so much kind of coming into play that when July 1st hits and Uber and Lyft, let's say, does decide to leave, we'll see. But let's say they do decide to leave, we might be fine. And the reason why this is so influential is then other states like Massachusetts right now, or any other state could say, hey, well, in Minneapolis, the first thing they did is put the law forward. They pushed it back. They gave other ride-sharing companies times to prepare. They launched their new wage bill, and everything was fine. Even though Uber and Lyft did leave, everything was fine. Maybe we can do it too. And this is kind of like, again, the first breadcrumb that is slowly moving things forward to protect drivers and treat them the way they should actually be treated.